And I remember the Brexit referendum that happened on a Thursday, and I woke up on a Friday to the referendum outcome, and it wasn't unexpected. I think you could see that the mood of the British public, or at least the majority of the British public, even though it was a small margin, was for the United Kingdom to exit the European Union. I think wrongly so, but certainly that was the mood. So I wasn't entirely surprised, but I was shocked. In life, I think even though you don't expect something to happen, even though you expect something to happen, if it's a high impact event, then you are still shocked by having to digest the consequences of the circumstances or decision that now confronts you. And I remember that weekend, I spent a lot of time thinking, and I put pen to paper on a Saturday and on a Sunday, and I wrote a paper. With a roadmap of where I thought Gibraltar should try to be over a period of 3 to 4 years in order to overcome some of the difficulties that undoubtedly would arise as a result of Brexit. Now, that was very early on in the process. There was always hope at that time that perhaps the United Kingdom might renegotiate its terms of membership and might include Gibraltar. There was also perhaps hope that there could be a change of government in the United Kingdom that might reverse Brexit, because Brexit was a process which led up to that legislation and withdrawal act that would ultimately result in the United Kingdom leaving the European Union. But within that, it was important that I started to think about what the consequences were, what the opportunities were, because every challenge has an opportunity, and what work would need to be done in order to restructure our financial services and related industries. And I remember clearly that I made one point in that paper. It's a paper which I still have. And I said, remembering and taking into account, and I'm just paraphrasing, that Gibraltar's right to access the UK financial market is not and does not arise as a result of Gibraltar's terms of membership of the European Union. In other words, Gibraltar and the UK were the same separate member state. The member state was the United Kingdom, and Gibraltar joined the EU as a result of UK membership in 1973. EU law did not apply as between Gibraltar and the UK, and therefore the United Kingdom gave Gibraltar UK market access, and I'm talking about companies that were set up in Gibraltar and licensed in Gibraltar by the Financial Services Commission. That market access for those companies into the United Kingdom arose as a result of a political commitment that was given by the UK government to Joe Bossano when he was first in government in 1995-1996 by the then Chancellor of the Exchequer, Kenneth Clarke, and that therefore we could divorce our rights under EU law, which were certainly at threat, from our rights in relation to UK market access. And the point that I made very emphatically in my paper was that the Gibraltar government needed to initiate a process of discussion very quickly with the United Kingdom government in order to obtain a commitment that ensured the continuation of the common market between Gibraltar and the UK. And the reason why that was important was that 90% of all financial services related activities undertaken in Gibraltar, which accounted for a very large part of our GDP, was UK business, UK facing business. It wasn't 90% of all companies, 90% of all business, which is different. It's an important distinction to make, but it's 90% of all business. The Gibraltar government mobilized itself very, very quickly and obtained the necessary commitments from the UK government. I'm clearly talking about the current administration, the current government led by Fabian Picardo. And that was important in order to provide a stable continuation for companies that were currently operating from Gibraltar in the United Kingdom. The next aspect of the work that I identified in my paper that needs to be done was a restructure of those parts of our financial services industry that were dependent and reliant on European business. In other words, under the common market that exists currently within the European Union, which existed back then when we were part of the EU, any company that is licensed in a member state, which included Gibraltar, was able to operate across the European Union on the strength of its Gibraltar license. License issued and granted by the Financial Services Commission. And there were many companies that undertook EU business, and that therefore, come Brexit, and on Brexit date, those companies would no longer be able to continue to trade in the European Union, and not only continue to trade in the European Union in terms of new business, but to the extent that the company had existing obligations to customers, then those obligations needed to be managed in a way that was compliant with European Union law. And the biggest area that was affected by this was the insurance sector in Gibraltar. In other words, an insurance company issues new policies, and an insurance company can stop issuing new policies tomorrow, but to the extent that it has existing liabilities, as indeed an insurance company would have, to existing policyholders, then by putting the company into runoff, you have continued obligations to pay claims. And a restructure of that business had to be done in a manner that complied with European Union legislation. That was a huge piece of work that had to be done, and it's a huge piece of work that was undertaken by the local industry in conjunction with the support of the government and indeed the regulator in Gibraltar. And I'll say a little bit about that because that's important, and it shows the magnitude of the work and the challenge that this entailed. We had to look at different scenarios of what we were going to do with that business. The clearest, I think, solution, if I can say so, would be to move that business, the existing business and the new business, to another jurisdiction. And I traveled to Luxembourg to look at whether or not Luxembourg was the right jurisdiction, the right domicile, and I came to the conclusion that it wasn't. It's a highly reputable jurisdiction, but the language is different, and the legal system is very different to our legal system, which is based on English law and indeed common law. That then took me to Malta. Malta ticked all the relevant boxes, English-speaking jurisdiction, and indeed a lot of their laws are derived from English law and English common law. I also looked briefly at whether or not we could accommodate some of that business over in La Linea, what I refer to as the La Linea solution, in order to encourage more greater commercial involvement by companies in Gibraltar on the other side of the border for very obvious reasons related to the sort of issues that today dominate the thinking and discussions between the Gibraltar government, UK government, and the Spanish government. But I quickly discarded that for regulatory reasons. And over a period of 2 years, I restructured all the insurance business that could be restructured. We restructured it by 2 solutions. One was to move the companies from Gibraltar to Malta through a process known as redomiciliation, that you move the company lock, stock and barrel, and it ceases to be based in Gibraltar, licensed in Gibraltar, and then it will be reconstituted as the same legal entity, in this case in Malta, and licensed in Malta by the Maltese regulator. So that was one solution. The other solution was portfolio transfers. We undertook the portfolio transfer of insurance assets and liabilities outside Gibraltar, and these transactions happened over a period of 2 years. I said previously that every challenge presents an opportunity, and whilst I was in Malta, visiting Malta and discussing the challenges presented by Brexit, I soon realized that parts of the Maltese financial services sector was also facing the same sort of challenges that Gibraltar was facing, but in reverse. In other words, Gibraltar companies were facing the threat of not being able to continue to do business in the European Union, but we had been able to secure the continuation of the common market between Gibraltar and the United Kingdom, and therefore we secured that UK business and segregated that business from the European business. By moving the European business to Malta or doing portfolio transfers, we were able to overcome that difficulty, but Maltese companies faced a similar situation, not in relation to EU business because they are part of the European Union, but UK business. In other words, those companies in Malta that undertook UK business on the strength of their European license would not be able to continue that business post-Brexit and post the transitional arrangements which the UK government put in place. Therefore, as a result of that, and it's one of the ironies in life, that as a result of that, Gibraltar was able to secure more business from Malta to Gibraltar than the business that we had lost from Gibraltar into Malta. So underpinning that, I think, is the message that challenges do also present opportunities, and as long as you are aware and work hard to identify what these are, then clearly you can mitigate the worst impact of any particular threat. One of the other things that I identified in my paper, which I said I wrote that weekend, the same weekend as the UK referendum, was this. I postulated that if Gibraltar was leaving the European Union, then to the extent that we were able to secure continued UK market access, one of the areas which the Gibraltar government should look at very carefully was what opportunities could we identify in areas which did not relate to UK business. In other words, those areas of financial services activity or licensing activities that did not require UK, and I'll use the technical term, UK passporting, because they were of an international nature, no UK consumers, no UK activity, wholly international business based from Gibraltar that had nothing to do with the UK, and those UK arrangements with the Gibraltar government and the Gibraltar financial services industry. I pointed out that it was important for us to consider those particular areas to see where we could grow our financial sector. And we have done that. And I'm very happy to see that Gibraltar over the last year has been very much engaged in identifying what areas we can develop that might require changes in our legislation. Change in legislation that doesn't require us to implement regulatory standards that are imposed by the European Union, which sometimes actually have no common sense behind it, and I'm sorry to say that, but that's the reality. And secondly, make legislative changes that are not required to match UK standards of regulation, precisely because no UK business is involved. And we've passed legislation in the funds sector over the last year to promote that in the area of funds. And one of the other sectors that I'm very excited about, because it does give Gibraltar a significant opportunity that we haven't been able to take advantage of before, precisely because we were under statutory requirements and standards imposed by the European Union, is the development of what I call a captive regime, an insurance captive regime in Gibraltar for non-UK business and non-UK risks and non-UK policyholders. That legislation is currently being drafted, and as I said, potentially that is an important area of economic growth within our financial sector. People ask me, what are the major challenges for the financial sector post-Brexit? Now, I've attempted to articulate and to explain the restructure that needed to take place in the financial services sector as a result of Brexit. That restructure involved a restructure of companies for regulatory and licensing reasons. So we did that over a period of years in order to meet the Brexit date, the date upon which the UK exited the EU. At the same time, local companies obviously started to look at, other areas of restructuring. But I think today, one of the areas that I think presents one of the biggest challenges for Gibraltar, and it's not necessarily related to Brexit, but it could obviously be impacted by Brexit, but it's not necessarily related to Brexit, is to do with labour. Gibraltar is clearly geographically very small, and we have a limited labour pool in Gibraltar. I think there are more jobs in the financial services sector and related industries than local applicants from the local labour market, and I'm talking specifically about people that are resident, and indeed our fellow Gibraltarians. There are more jobs than local applicants seek to apply for. And this is a major issue. This is a major issue within the labour market, and certainly what we see in the labour market in Gibraltar in these sectors is for a recycle of labour and a recycle of employment, where people unfortunately, or fortunately from their point of view, unfortunately from the point of view of the industry, there is a recycling of labour, and people move from one job to another within the labour market. But that labour market is a limited supply, given purely the nature and size of Gibraltar. And therefore, historically, we have relied on two sources of labour to service the local economy. One, and primarily, as far as business which is undertaken from Gibraltar into the UK, that UK market access that I referred to before, primarily the labour pool tends to come from the United Kingdom to Gibraltar. But of course, it's a challenge to bring people from outside the jurisdiction, because not everybody necessarily is in a position where they can relocate their families and their personal circumstances and opt to come to Gibraltar in short notice. And it really is a major challenge to recruit in Gibraltar and sometimes even to recruit the right people. The next pool of labor supply comes from Spain, and some industries more than others. It's not as much for the financial services sector. In other words, the supply of labor from Spain is limited in the financial services sector. It's not so limited in other sectors, but it's certainly limited in the financial services sector in Gibraltar, and doesn't account for a large percentage of people that are employed in Gibraltar. It's a challenge. And it's a challenge which I think requires thought process, and at some point it does require a solution. How do we encourage people from Gibraltar in particular to apply for the local jobs available in the financial industry, and indeed to build up the relevant skills in this sector? I would like to think that more could be done in this area. I think more could be done to increase awareness amongst young people in particular as to the type of jobs that are available in the finance sector in Gibraltar. Very well paid jobs, skill-based jobs. So I think increasing awareness, is important. Increasing awareness not just from the available labour pool in Gibraltar, but also increasing awareness from students that are either in the United Kingdom pursuing a degree course, or indeed students that haven't yet gone to study in the United Kingdom but are thinking of going to study, and therefore perhaps influence them into taking degree courses that are relevant for the job opportunities that are available in Gibraltar. I think we would also benefit from training schemes that allow youngsters to join companies, to be trained in those skills that are important to ensure the permanence of that sector in Gibraltar, should companies take, for example, a decision to relocate at some point in the future. To ensure permanence of skills in Gibraltar is important for our economic well-being. Interestingly, the COVID has changed the dynamics of the labour market outside Gibraltar, and indeed in most jurisdictions. The fact that people were required to work from home during the pandemic has meant that companies have become more comfortable for employees to continue to work from home. And I think this has had a positive influence in the economic dynamics in the larger countries. And I'll give an example. The United Kingdom, for example. United Kingdom, many companies have continued to encourage employees and allowed employees to work from home, because they have considered that employees are just as productive working from home as they are working in an office environment. Why has this been important for the labour market? Well, it's been important for the labour market because it's if you like, removed geographical barriers into entry into the labour market. And what I mean by that is that prior to COVID, if somebody in Manchester, say, found a job being advertised in Haywards Heath, for example, in the south of England, the chances are that that individual wouldn't apply for that local job because, just purely because you can't just simply relocate your family, sell a home and relocate to the south of England. So it was unlikely that people would move geographically from one part of the United Kingdom to the other. And in that scenario, jobs were local. So what we've seen is a shift from localization to national, to employment at a national level, because companies are more prepared to allow their employees to work from home and therefore work remotely. And if you're working remotely, it doesn't matter whether you're in Manchester, Edinburgh, or anywhere else. It just doesn't matter if the company is located in the south of England, the north of England, and whether there is 1,000 miles between you. Gibraltar, unfortunately, hasn't been able to take advantage of that because of our geographical size. And this is one of the challenges for us in growing the local labor market. Is there something that we can do? I mean, one of the things that I think is worth exploring is allowing and considering whether we ought to be more flexible in allowing people outside the jurisdiction where there isn't a demand in the local labor market. To the extent that there is a demand in the local labor market, those jobs should go locally. But to the extent that there isn't a demand in the labor market and it is difficult to bring somebody from outside Gibraltar to work in Gibraltar for the reasons that I've said before, then to that extent, one of the areas that I think we need to explore is whether or not we ought to allow more flexibility from an employment and regulatory perspective in allowing people to work remotely in Gibraltar in terms of being located outside the jurisdiction on a day-to-day basis, but then obviously being required to travel to Gibraltar to meet their statutory, regulatory and tax obligations locally.